Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Next Level Freelancing Show. I'm Robert McGuire, and I run Nation 1099, a resource for experienced freelancers and consultants who are looking for advanced career and business guidance. Our goal for this show is for you to have real practical steps at the end of every episode that you can use right away to improve your business. This show focuses on real-life problems that freelancers are having. I've collected a few examples in advance, and our guest each week will give advice on those specific cases. That will take about a half an hour, and then we'll turn to your questions. And I see we have one posted in advance already. Our theme today is how we as freelancers can use the tools of public relations in order to get more clients for ourselves. And our guest, I'm pleased to say, is Michelle Garrett. She's a freelancer herself, specifically a PR specialist who helps major corporations and startups to increase their visibility. Some of her past clients include Hewlett-Packard, Sun Microsystems, and Trek Aerosystems. Michelle, thanks very much for lending us your expertise today.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Yes, welcome. Now, before we start, a little bit about what you're seeing on the screen, those folks who are live are visiting or watching this live stream. If you have a comment, the chat window on the right there is good for that, and please do participate. But it's hard for us to monitor that for specific questions. So if there's something that you want Michelle to address on this topic, then please use that Ask a Question button down there at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to that. So we will talk for about 30 minutes on some of the cases that we have prepared, and then we'll turn to those questions. And the top navigation bar has links to more information about Michelle and about Nation 1099. You can also share this episode with your colleagues, and you can follow this channel to be notified about upcoming episodes. Lastly, the show will be available for replay afterward at Nation 1099. So, Michelle, before we start, I have a basic question, which is, it stems from the fact that the purpose of Nation 1099 is really to take the abundant advice that's out there for people running small businesses and major corporations and try to translate that to a solo context. So my question is really, can the advice about public relations be translated to a solo context? Is it possible for a freelance software engineer or a marketing consultant or a freelance photographer to use PR tactics in order to get more clients and grow their business?
Well, I think absolutely is the answer. In fact, I often use myself as a guinea pig and try out things that I would like to use, for my clients' benefit on my, with my own business as the guinea pig. So with social media, with the, ever increasing number of blogs, and obviously podcasts are very hot, and there are so many opportunities, and I think that soloists can capitalize on those just like a small business could.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, so let's get into the cases. The first case that I collected here in advance, let me read it. I get that guest posting, podcast appearances, and mentions in blogs are good for my freelance business, but it's very time consuming to create and pitch that content. And it's hard to know if and when it results in new clients for me. I would like a way to evaluate results so I can judge where it makes sense to put my efforts. How can I get started with tracking and measuring?
Well, I think the easiest answer, as a starting point at least, is Google Analytics, because you can see where the traffic is coming from if you have that enabled on your site. And again, it is free, so everybody really should be taking advantage of that. You can go in there and see, for example, if your traffic's coming from Twitter, or if it's coming from Facebook, or if it's coming from a particular guest post or something like that.
And so do you have a sense of like what benchmarks are good? Like, how do I know, how do I kind of convert that into like a return on effort? Or how would a public relations firm do that?
I think they would really look to see, they would look at conversions, and obviously there are touch points along the way, and, somebody might read a blog post and then they might start following you on social media, and then they might start clicking from there. And so it's really just part of the journey, the customer journey. And I think PR can really play into that. I do think that measuring the effects of PR is still not down to an exact science. And I think a lot of us are still looking, at the most effective ways, but there is a lot more out there now about how to measure and track. And obviously there are all, end of articles. And one expert that I like to follow is Andy Crestodina, who is at Crestodina on Twitter. And he has some excellent advice and many times we'll boil it down, to a couple of points, especially if you're not an expert at it. You might be overwhelmed by some of the advice that you see or read or hear. So it's always good to have a couple of folks to follow. And I think you're a great person to follow as well.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we don't have much on Nation 1099 about public relations. I mean, I feel like SEO in general, like just getting stuff placed for the SEO value is a concept that's well understood, and there's lots of advice out there, but getting stuff out there in order to really build your brand recognition or your name recognition, and to get people coming to you directly, not just because there's SEO juice out of the link, but to really to come to because they're curious. That's a less familiar subject, I think, in the world of digital marketing. What about from like a project management perspective? So you were talking about tracking results. But what about just like tracking your effort? Like, how do you keep track of, the editors you're reaching out? Do you like homebrew your Excel sheets, or are there tools that you use?
Well, I mean, yes, the good old Excel spreadsheet, of course, is available to anyone, and a lot of us are on a budget, so that's, there's no shame in that if that's what you have to use. There are a lot of tools. For example, I know one tool that is really fantastic if you're doing media relations or reaching out to bloggers or influencers, that I have seen is Meltwater, because they allow you to track who is reading. For example, if you pitch a blog idea to an editor or influencer or what have you, you can see if they've opened it, if they've spent any time reading it, if they've clicked on the links.
Right.
It's really remarkable.
That's right. And I remember I see that you have I've been seeing on Twitter, you have a webinar you're presenting on Meltwater next week or the week after.
Yes, it's next Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll make sure to get a link for the visitors of this so they can see that. And as you're describing that, it occurs to me that I use this SEO tool, and a lot of the SEO tools, the one I use is SEMrush. I'm not recommending that one in particular, but it's the one I happen to be using lately. And I think a lot of these SEO tools have similar kind of tracking tools built into them. So they'll have recommendations about where to reach out. I remember seeing this when I used SpyFu. It's an SEO tool, and it had a lot of recommendations about who to reach out to for links, but also, I guess, from a PR perspective. And then you could sort of track your progress in going through their recommendations, and to see, okay, I've done this errand, I haven't done that errand yet, and who I need to follow up with. All right, terrific. Let's talk about the next case. I want to try all the familiar public relation tactics like guest posting, engaging with reporters, and responding to HARO queries. We're going to have to explain HARO. Let me finish this. But I'm struggling with being authentic. I feel like I'm just joining a deafening chorus of people begging for links all the time. How do I keep up a PR effort that has an impact? And for people watching this who don't recognize HARO, that's short for Help a Reporter Out. And this is a service where reporters can post an inquiry about a story they're working on, and then experts can respond and say, hey, you should quote me or interview me for this story that you're working on. So that's one way that you can put yourself in front of journalists who are working on stories on a given subject. So this case is, I'm struggling with being authentic. I feel like I'm joining a deafening chorus of people begging for links all the time. How do I keep up a PR effort that has an impact?
Well, I think the simple answer is you have to be tenacious and you have to be committed, and you do want to have a plan. I think a lot of times people are just like willy-nilly, like, I'm just going to try posting here and I'm going to put on the social media platform. And so I think it's good to, first of all, figure out where your audience is. I mean, that's always, a key to any marketing or PR effort. And, obviously I work a lot with B2B companies. So for B2B to be on Instagram or Snapchat, maybe not as much as LinkedIn or Twitter. So that's just, something to kind of look into. It's going to be different for every business. And you probably have a sense of that. But, it's always good to do a little bit of research if you don't. I mean, there's, I know so many people who start businesses and they just kind of are, again, they haven't really done all the research that they should have done before they started the effort. And then they wonder why. So I think it's good to do that up front.
Yeah. Well, I feel like maybe this is just me, but I can imagine a lot of people, it's just hard asking, right? And so you feel anxious, like typing an email saying, hey, will you feature me? I mean,
Yeah.
what is the language you use or the voice you use on behalf of your clients or on behalf of yourself to say, hey, you ought to write about us?
Well, I think, obviously trying to think a little bit outside the box is, a really good approach. And I always emphasize that you should be very service oriented when you're dealing with reporters or bloggers. Obviously, they don't have to do anything for you. They don't owe you anything. And so they are getting, many requests a day. Some of them, at a bigger publication would get hundreds of emails a day, phone calls, social media, messages. So I really think that, being polite and, not expecting, not having a, kind of looking at it like, what do they owe you? That's just not a good way to go about it. And then kind of thinking about what's going to appeal to their audience, because that's what they're going to want to write about and include. So, for example, if you're writing about a topic for them, think about what their audience is going to be interested in. And sometimes, once you get out there, you'll get approached. That can even happen. For sure, it's happened for me.
Yeah, that kind of goes to the issue. You didn't bring it up in particular, but I'm fascinated about how often it comes up in every discussion of how to succeed as a freelancer, which is developing a niche. I see that one of the folks tuning in here is Elise Bennon, who emphasizes that very much. And so you're not going to get approached as an expert unless you are an expert, right? And the only way to be an expert is to really commit to developing a niche. So it seems like a key part of succeeding when it comes to PR tactics is a key part to succeeding in all these other ways, which is really committing to a specific niche. Have you seen that example? It's hard to picture an example with, like if I was a business and I was opening a cafe, or if I was launching a new product, I can see the case for pitching myself to a newspaper, a reporter. If I'm a solo provider of freelance photography or something, or of software engineering or writing, what is a situation in which I might find myself approaching a reporter and saying, hey, you ought to write about what I do?
Well, I mean, in some cases, it could be, you've won an award, or, you've received some recognition, or maybe you're, speaking at a big event or something like that. That's at a local level. Now, I mean, obviously to get national coverage, that's going to be an entirely different, ball game. And obviously everybody wants to be featured in Forbes as a columnist and things like that. And that's just not very easy to do. Yeah. And honestly, they seem to be, everybody wants that, and you see no end of those types of gigs on Upwork and things like that. And so I would say, don't shoot for the moon right out of the gate. I mean, obviously, I'm never going to, I don't want to be like Debbie Downer and squash your dreams or anything, but I mean, start with things that, would make sense, and then kind of work your way up from there. I say the same thing to small businesses who, want to be in the Wall Street Journal. When I was in Silicon Valley, it was very common for me to go into a startup who no one had ever heard of. And they'd say, well, we really want to be in TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal. I'd say, well, that's good and well, but, we start at a lower, kind of the lower hanging fruit. So I'd say exactly the same for soloists and freelancers.
Yeah. And not that I've had tremendous amount of success this myself, but I run Nation 1099. That's the context of which I'm hosting this. But, what I actually do is I'm a marketing consultant who specializes in education technology and online learning. That's the niche that I work in. And so being persistent in working in that niche and having clients in that area and developing my own point of view about what's going with the trends in that industry has meant that I've developed blog posts and then get on my own blog and then guest posts that I placed elsewhere. And that has resulted, one, in clients reaching out to me directly, because they'll see those pieces that I've posted as a guest on other publications. But it also means reporters will reach out to me sometimes, because not that I'm the leading expert. I don't mean to say that, but I'm close enough. I'll appear in search often enough that occasionally a reporter will ask me to reach out to ask me to talk about education technology and online learning in some way. And so I think that's an example of how committing to a niche can make a difference.
Yeah. And you can also do newsjacking. That's another thing that just popped into my head.
Yeah.
So anyone can do that. If you're on social media and there's a story breaking, or, a trend you see that you have a comment on, and you start posting, maybe you even get a really quick blog post up and start putting it on social media, or even just commenting on social media. Sometimes you can even, be tapped as an expert on a particular subject. I've seen that happen too.
Yeah. But it comes down to actually being an expert on the subject, right? You can't be if you're all things to all people, then you're never going to make an impression.
That's true.
So the next case that we're going to talk about, let me read this one. I think I finally figured out something obvious. There are just too many ideas out there about like newsjacking. There's another one to add to the list. There are too many ideas out there about how to promote my freelance business. I've been getting nowhere by trying 100 different things that are only half complete. How do I make good strategic decisions about which ways of promoting my freelance services make sense?
Well, I mean, I think, again, trial and error can really play into this. And for me, a lot of it, and not everyone will probably agree with this, but I mean, for me, it's following my gut and just kind of staying true to who I am and what I know. And I mean, I think if you do that, people are going to notice, because obviously, kind of to your previous point about trying to be all things to all people, people see through that. And I think if you're really, really, really true to who you are and what you believe in, and kind of stick to those topics as much as you can, you're gonna shine. I mean, that's gonna be apparent, and that's gonna get you in a better place. Now, that does sound very, like, I don't know, maybe not so practical, but I think another thing is, just to be kind of stay in your lane. I was looking at my notes because I wrote a note to myself about CJ Hayden. She is kind of a business coach for small businesses, and she's somebody I followed for many years. She has a lot of good tips for freelancers and small business owners. And she always talks about kind of staying in your lane and not forcing it. And so another thing she talks about is how sometimes somebody's a natural born speaker. Sometimes somebody is better at writing, so there are a lot of tactics you can use to, work on marketing and PR for your business. However, not every tactic is going to work for every person. So I think it's important to know yourself that way too.
Yeah. So you're emphasizing knowing your own strengths and playing to those. Mm-hmm. And something you said earlier in an earlier question we were discussing about, not chasing whatever is the most fashionable channel at the moment. So maybe it's LinkedIn or maybe it's Instagram, but it's really about knowing what channel your prospective audience is in, or your prospective clients are in. So it seems like part of making strategic decisions, making good strategic decisions, is having a clear sense of what's fashionable and what's really relevant to your business.
Yes, I think that's true. Mm-hmm. And if you try one thing and it doesn't work, you try direct mail. That was too expensive. You didn't see a return, try something else, just, obviously keep track of what you've tried and how it's worked and what your results have been. And then kind of go back to the drawing board or evaluate and repeat or go a different way. And sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone. That was the other thing I was thinking. So. Even if you're not an actual board speaker, point here, you still have to sometimes, I love getting my clients in the spotlight, but I'm not always so comfortable with it. So that's something I've kind of had to learn, over the years, is that I do have to sometimes, get out of my bubble and get out of my comfort zone. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So getting your clients in the spotlight. So when you get your clients in the spotlight, what are some examples of that? What do you mean in the spotlight? What does that look like? Because I want to find a parallel. I want to find a parallel for the people listening here. Like some of these folks I know and some I don't, like Jesse and Allison Carvel and so on. So how can Jesse and Allison and Elise and so on put themselves in the spotlight? What does that look like?
Well, I think it looks like, obviously I don't understand people that aren't on social media at all. I don't think you need to be on every social media channel, as we talked about earlier, figure out what works for you. However, I know a lot of, soloists and small business owners who just don't see the value in it, and they don't think that it's really, they have time, and I think, there are ways to make it work for you. There are things like Buffer that's free for a single user account. And there's no reason, you can't set that up. It's very easy to use. And so, that's just one, easy way. But then, like, once you have that, so getting them in the spotlight. So once you have, like, you have to have a website, you have to have a social media presence. I think those things you have to have. And then from there, you can work on, trying to get them in stories, mentioned in a story as a source, for example, using something like Haro, or, just having, checking editorial calendars sometimes for publications. They publish, not all of them do, but some publish what they have coming up. Maybe you're an expert on, I don't know, swimming pools. And so, in February or March of that year, you're going to start looking at editorial calendars to see, what stories you can get in for that summer, because they plan that far out. And so then you can pitch yourself or have your PR expert pitch you as a source for a story, and you can supply resources, research that you've done, or images, or infographics, or video, or anything that you might have that might be useful to them to use, because they love that. Reporters, love it when you have your ducks in a row and you're kind of prepared and ready with whatever they might need. So I don't know if I answered the question, but
yeah, well, and I'm thinking about some of the different, I guess, platforms, or where different places the spotlights are shining. And one that occurs to me, I guess I wasn't even conscious that I was doing this. To some degree, I was like, I'm often looking for speaking engagement. You kind of raised this with me yourself a couple months ago. You said, hey, let's find some conferences we can present at. And so the first thing that comes to mind is like conferences, right? Like, $1,000 registration and $5,000 worth of hotel bills and flights and everything, and you're there for a week, and not, no one's going to accept me to be on the agenda at a conference like that. But if you think a little bit creatively, there might be other things that are conferences that make sense, that you can, speaking opportunities that you can present at. So in my case, I was on this sort of online digital summit last month talking about digital marketing. It was just, I saw the call for speakers and pitch myself. I came up with a topic and pitch myself. And then the other thing is, this has been less successful for me lately because it's become kind of flooded. But a year and a half ago, it was less flooded, and I was pitching myself as a guest on podcasts, what I call pod guesting.
Yes.
So I had my VA work up a kind of pitch sheet. You probably do this for your clients, a kind of pitch sheet about me. And sending it out to podcast hosts, and it's a slog. We had to be patient. There were a lot of no answers, a lot of rejection, but there were, I was on maybe 10 different podcasts as a result. And that's great for the SEO and great for the incoming traffic. So there are a couple of the examples of spotlights that maybe people don't think of. What are some others that you work on with your clients that you're trying to get them into?
Well, I mean, I'll use an example for myself. I get invited to guest on Twitter chats. So that really helps. I'm a big Twitter fan. So, I mean, there's no secret there. And again, no shame in it, because it's my favorite. Okay. So, but I have one coming up in August that I'm going to be a guest on. And that kind of spun out of another one that I pitched myself for and was selected. And so, I mean, the same thing can work for clients. Now, a lot of my clients are not quite so social media, savvy. I hate to say it, but I help them with their social media, because they don't want to post, or they don't know how to do a Twitter chat, or they, but I think obviously some of our folks today in our audience would certainly be savvy enough to do that.
That's excellent. I hadn't thought of that, because I'll see promos for Twitter chats once in a while, and everybody's got their style, right? So that one just doesn't. It doesn't ring my bell. It hadn't occurred to me to try and host one or whatever, or to put myself in one. But so that's an example you're talking about. Swim in your lane, play to your strengths, and look for the unexplored opportunities. And there's sort of an unexplored opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, so those are the cases we had prepared. Let's turn we have one question, and so let me sort of put out a call for anybody who is live on here now. Use the Ask a Question button down here below, and post a question, and we will spend as much time as you would like answering them. So we have one now. It's from Allison, who mentioned, by the way, Reagan Chat, which I'm not.
That's how we met. We know each other.
Oh, okay. What is Reagan Chat? Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes. Reagan Communications and PR Daily hosts a weekly Twitter chat Tuesdays at 3 Eastern. Okay. And I've met a number of really fabulous fellow communicators and PR folks on that chat, and Allison is one of them. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, I guess.
Oh.
So Allison asks, what do you suggest for PR tactics when creating your message concisely, but still appealing to many varied industries or audiences?
Oh dear. Well, I mean, a lot of times I work with clients who play into a number of verticals. And so we usually start with kind of the core of the message that we can then tailor for the various verticals. So, for example, we start with kind of maybe the overall business message or business story. And then if they play into the manufacturing vertical, they play into a technology vertical, and, that kind of thing, we'll kind of tailor it for that. And, once you kind of have the core, then you can work from that and go a number of different ways. And again, it's trial and error. I mean, pitching, and developing different messages, trying out different messages. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes if your pitch doesn't work, you can always self-publish now. That's another way to get your name out there, LinkedIn, Medium, and obviously on your own blog. That's the first place your piece should probably appear. And then you can repurpose it on other platforms. So.
All right. Terrific. And so the next question comes from Scott Sharp, and he asks, what % of your time should be spent doing PR and media?
Like overall?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, social media, you can spend all day, right? I mean, be careful. But I mean, if you're using, like, if say you have, I don't know what percentage of your time you're using on marketing your business, I would say, PR should be maybe 25%, something like that, depending on what else you're doing. It really, I think that's a little tough to answer, not knowing the particulars, but.
Well, let me ask you, so I have an observation about business development generally, and let me ask about what you notice with your clients, and we'll just start like with major corporations and smaller businesses. I often see the guidance, and I often think of it this way: the business development should be around 20% of your time. So fully booked would be, I'm working for my clients directly 80% of my time, and I'm holding back 20% of my time to work on getting more clients or better clients. And other formulas I've seen and discussed with other experts, it's more like 70% of your time is fully booked and 20% of your time is held back for business development. And then really 10% is like administrative and managing your business and bookkeeping and stuff like that. So in theory, if 20% of my time, which is 1 day a week, is reserved for business development, how much of that 1 day a week should I put towards, say, other forms of marketing, sales calls, and then like how much would you reserve for this kind of trying to get press mentions and public relations?
Well, I mean, if you only have a day a week and a portion of that day, I mean, I would say you're going to have to spend at least a couple of hours on it, especially in the beginning. I think once you get it started, you're going to know, you're going to learn things, right? So it's going to get a little bit easier. So there's always like a learning curve and getting organized. And, I have trouble kind of focusing and getting myself, for my own business anyway, getting myself kind of reined in on what's going to make the most difference, what's going to make the most impact for me. Because sometimes I'll be approached to write a guest post for a publication, and I'll have to think about, is that really, it speaks to my ego in a way, like, thank you for asking me, but does it really reach the audience that I'm trying to reach? And so I think you have to kind of sort that out too. And
how do you evaluate that?
Well, I mean, again, you get better at it over time. In the beginning, I think when you first start blogging, you're like anybody that asks you, to be interviewed or ask you for a guest, you're going to probably just say yes and just get it over there, And so I think as you go, you're going to get probably a little bit more savvy about that and learn lessons about, I spent, 5 hours writing that and not, I didn't get a single, click out of it. Or I didn't get any, mentions or any, nothing came out of it. Right. So then it was maybe not a good use of your time. So then you just don't write for that publication maybe again. So, yeah. Yeah.
When it comes to the SEO value part of it, let's assume like nobody actually clicks it, but there's like a value because Google
Right.
is giving credit to that link to you, right? And that's improving how you appear in search results. Hypothetically, I mean, that's not what you want at all, right? You want the SEO value, and you want people to click the link and come to you because they're interested in what you're saying. But hypothetically, just the second value of that, right? I often consider a metric, and one simple one is the Moz domain authority. And so I'll have in mind a kind of minimum domain authority that is worth the trouble. Like if I get a link on a site with a DA of 30, that's not worth much to me. But if I get a link on a site with a DA of 60, that's worth a lot more to me in terms of SEO value. And that I don't know, do you think is that a proxy for the actual PR value?
I think it's one way to measure. Again, I think we do struggle to measure from a PR perspective. So I think, if you're cobbling together, you can't afford a tool. Like, some of the tools are expensive. And if you can't afford that, then I think Moz is, it's free, right? So, and they have a paid version, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think that could be one measure. And I think that's a good point because I've heard that. I've heard speakers at Content Marketing World and places talk about, that kind of a tactic. So
yeah, and of course it can be a huge mistake. People make this with SEO, is going for high value, high domain authority links, but they're not relevant. It's on sites where the traffic is not relevant. So obviously the reverse can be true. You can be on a site with low traffic, but it is your traffic, right? So, 10 clicks from people who are actually prospective buyers is worth a lot more than 100 clicks from people who are tire kickers or, got the wrong idea about what you do and they're in the wrong place.
Right. Oh, that's absolutely true. Yeah. Completely true. So that's why, and I try to stress that to clients too. It's like, well, it's like sometimes they go into it thinking, well, we really want to be in that publication. But when they really look at, give me an opportunity to get you in a industry vertical publication versus the publication that you're looking at, maybe we can look at the results and see, which one really drove more business your way. Because I think that at the end of the day, that's what's important. It may be, again, a vanity, some vanity involved, some ego involved. So you really have to take that away and try to be very clear about what your objective is and how you're going to get.
A friend of mine who works in digital marketing, he calls those vanity metrics. Like I've got 1 million followers. Although, as we're recording this, the news today is that Twitter is going to kick off a lot of those fake followers. So our vanity metrics are going to take a hit, right?
Yeah, it's going to be great for those of us who don't pay for our followers.
Yeah, right. So the next question, can you elaborate on the differences between PR and social communication objectives, or is there a difference? This is from Jane.
PR and social communication objectives. Well, I mean, in my mind, content marketing, PR, and social media are all very much connected. In fact, I wrote recently about, I get nervous now when clients don't put PR and social media kind of in the same bucket because it's like, well, we're going to have you handle PR, but, we have our college intern over here doing the social media. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. However, you need to be synced up and anything you're earning out of your PR efforts needs to go right into your social media efforts. Because again, once you earn the coverage, if you're just letting it lay there and you're not doing anything with it, that's really not seeing it through. You really need to promote your PR after it appears, after the article appears, after you're on the podcast or your piece is published. You need to be pushing it on social media and sharing it and putting it in your newsletter or, just using it across the board in every which way possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this whole conversation is sort of based on a false premise that PR is different from marketing and different from content marketing. And you're absolutely right. There's not a bright line between those things at all. When you start to develop good content, it's going to lead to PR opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
The other question that we have, this is from Jesse, who's a colleague of mine. For those of us who are mildly terrified about being in the limelight but want to be better at it. Jesse, did you know I scheduled for you to be the guest next week? What would you recommend to get more comfortable putting ourselves out there?
That's a really good question. I think starting with a smaller venue, when I speaking is not my favorite thing. I'm going to be very honest about that. So, And I, being on camera, not my natural state. Okay, so I'm great at behind the keyboard, right? I'm great at Twitter chats. I'm great at writing. I can do that all day, and I'm very comfortable and happy in that lane. But to get more comfortable speaking, I kind of started out with smaller venues, so like local chamber of commerce, local library, things like that. Just small. It doesn't matter again if even 5 people show up or 10 people. Then you can move on. Once you get a little bit more comfortable. And really, you just kind of have to make up your mind that you're going to break out of your comfort zone. You're just going to try it. What's the worst thing that can happen? That's always what I think. It's like, well, I know I'm afraid and I have all these ideas and fears, but really, it's at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe, I get tongue tied for a minute, I have to take a breath and then I go on, like that's not so bad. And it happens to even the best speakers. So I think we're really hard on ourselves and we need to kind of, give things a try sometimes and then go from there.
All right. Terrific. Well, we're about to wrap up. Thanks everyone for asking questions. Michelle, where can people learn more about your work?
Well, of course, I have a blog on my website, which I think I can type it in here, right? Let's see.
Yeah, there's no hurry. You can, when we're wrapping up, you can paste it there in the comment thread. And will you also paste in there some of these resources you mentioned and the other blogs and chat handles that you mentioned?
Yeah. Absolutely. Andy Crestodina is one.
Okay.
I love. That's at Crestodina. Let's see. What else are we talking about? Oh, CJ Hayden. I mentioned her. I'm trying to think what her handle.
Yeah, you can paste it in there later and people can just come back and see it a little bit later. So if you'd like to submit your case for one of our future episodes, please send it in. We're looking for real life challenges to running and growing your solo business. And some of our upcoming episodes will be about working with virtual assistants. That's next Wednesday, setting your rates, building your brand, and shifting from more clients to better clients. So remember, when it comes to your freelance career, as we say, more is possible. We just need to find the steps to the next level. Michelle, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Robert. This was fun.
Sure. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.